Shalom. So I kind of sort of wanted to rant and um, there's just been so many things going on. I wanted to respond to Matthew regarding Calvinism, and then um, there was the discussion Emma had with Paul, and there's what's going on with Synod and the whole thing with Synod, and just a lot of different things. And so I decided, you know what, I'm gonna do some ranting. And maybe once I get this rant going, somebody will want to join for a conversation, because um, my thoughts are actually somewhat confused here. But here I prepared to play this clip with Emma speaking to Paul VanderKlay, and Paul is Catholic. Paul is very Catholic. I envy Paul's Catholicism. I was going to pull up Mark 12. I'm still going to pull up Mark 12. Here.
Are you going to try and make me Catholic?
No, I don't have anything to say that people haven't said to you before. I'm almost certain. Like, I was.
Well, you have. Your whole story is nothing that people have said to me before. So.
Well, yeah, but not in terms of like arguments for why you should be Catholic or something. Unless my
should I
story
be Catholic?
Is one of those. I think it would be better.
Really? Tell me why.
Because I mean, I can give you the like catechism explanation.
Your catechism's a lot longer than mine.
That is, actually, did I know that? I don't think I knew that.
Heidelberg Catechism is about this big.
It makes sense, but I didn't know that. Funny story. I didn't think Calvinists were still a thing until I got to college. I thought they died out like Puritans.
Well, I was raised being very suspicious of Catholics. You know, they had statues, but at least in New Jersey, the Catholic girls looked really hot. So, you know, it was one of these things. All these Italian Catholic girls.
They'll get you.
Yeah.
I mean, not you apparently, but plenty of people.
They didn't get me. No, I married.
So, what do you mean by Catholic, right? What does that word Catholic mean? And that's why I pulled up Mark 12. Well, I actually want to read this as well, even though this wasn't part of what I think. And as touching the dead that they rise, have ye not read in the book of Moses, how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Ye therefore do greatly err. And one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, and perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, what is the first commandment of all? And Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one God, Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. That is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love. And you have to understand there's this, they didn't include the and, but va'ahavta, there's a rabbinic concept called a hekesh, where two concepts are linked together with precisely the same word being used, and va'ahavta, and thou shalt love, it begins both these commandments, and so there's a asmachta there. There's a connection naturally there in the language. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. And the scribe said unto him, Well, master, thou hast said the truth. For there is one God, and there is none other but he. And to love him, and I hate the fact that he never capitalize him, except when it talks about Jesus, with all the heart and with all the understanding and with all the soul and with all the strength, and to love his neighbor as himself is more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. And when Jesus saw that he answered discreetly, he said unto him, Thou art not far from the kingdom of God, and no man after that durst ask him any question. And just to round this up, the Max shared on my Discord 48 deep, wise and deep sayings of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk. The Kotzker Rebbe was known for his pithy sayings. Number 7 came to mind. The way of the world is such that parents feel the pain of their children, but the children are oblivious to the suffering of their parents. Likewise, God feels our pain, but we are blind to his misery. And all of that to say, if you truly, so I've become a member of a Reformed synagogue. God have mercy on my soul. And it's all Paul VanderKlay's fault, right? Why am I even paying attention to the synod of the Christian Reformed Church North America and getting involved in Twitter spats regarding CRC Synod? Because I wish to be Catholic. Because I wish to be Catholic. In that I believe in one God who created the entire world. And that's my response to the whole debate in the Synod that Paul spoke to, and frankly, what had obviously very much irritated and agitated Father Stephen when we spoke last night on the live stream. I didn't realize it until I watched the clip on Paul's channel. Do you believe in one God? Do you actually believe in one God? One God who created everything. One God who suffers when we suffer. I mean, I could pull up so many things from the Gospels. I think the end of Matthew it is. When have we fed you? Right? Paul VanderKlay is Catholic. That was part of the reason I told him why I gave him my prayer shawl to wear. at Chino. Because the day before, a different Paul, Andrew was with his terrible Hebrew, ever mean hachai. I don't know if somebody wants to jump on. My brain is not very clear right now, but and there are a bunch of people watching. The Garth is at work pushing buttons, and Trey is being a witness and not understanding the Bible very well. Paul asked Paul, the Paul at Chino asked Paul VanderKlay, like, where do you get your authority from, right? And so if you know what a chasuble is, and that's what my very bad attempt at Photoshop was about. If you know what a Lynn, you are completely misunderstanding what I'm saying. There is no canceling of Paul going on here at all. I love Paul dearly, despite the fact he's fired. No, when I call him Catholic, I'm actually praising him. So the bishop's chasuble, the garment that a bishop wears as his sign of office, is actually a direct descendant of the talit. It's a sign of his office as wearing a talit in public, a talit gadol in public, was during the time of Jesus. And so when the Christian Bible talks, the Gospels talk about people reaching out to touch Jesus's garment, they're talking about that talit, that prayer shawl. And that was partially why I wanted Paul to speak with my prayer shawl in some sense, as an acknowledgement of his of the authority that he has as a Catholic priest. And Paul is a Catholic priest. I don't think I'm making much sense. Tim says, what do you mean by Catholic? And Dominic says, Paul is a Jesuit spy infiltrating the heresy. So the word Catholic means global, everything, right? So if you believe there is one God, right? And there is one religion of God, right? That wow, we have a Catholic.
Yep. How's it going?
Good. How are you? Greek Orthodox Catholic.
Yeah, the Holy Apostolic Catholic Orthodox Church.
Yes. Yes.
I just wanted to give you my everything I say is basically on the level of, catechism, Orthodox catechism level thing.
Okay.
So, but the just briefly, the one of the things my catechist told me was that the term Catholic in Greek means something like the fullness present in every place. Like a hologram is the complete image in every place you look in a hologram.
Mm.
That wherever the church is, it's the fullness of the church. So that's the understanding of Catholic in the Orthodox understanding, as far as I'm aware, as distinct from, Roman Catholic understanding, which would mean something like universal, the universal church.
Okay.
So that's my
okay. So you guys have a slightly different understanding, and I have to say, in this case, I kind of sort of there's a reason I like the Roman Catholic Church in a few particulars, and part of it is that I think if you're truly monotheistic, you have to believe that your religion is not necessarily in the sense you mean the fullness of, right? This is a criticism I have of Jews who don't understand why we believe there are covenants outside of Sinai and Torah, right? Everything that exists must exist in relationship to God if you believe that there is one God.
Yes.
There is no existence outside of relationship to God.
Yeah.
And if you believe that, and so I don't know, so specifically the CRC debate last night got into why is our church dying, and it is dying. I mean, the CRC, a third of their membership has disappeared. They're probably going to fragment further.
Yeah.
And like, I was wondering why Father Stephen was so worked up about the CRC Synod, but frankly, I think partially part of it is that he is also Catholic, right?
Yeah. Because he believes, really believes. Is that what you mean by Catholic? Somebody who really believes in one God?
Somebody who really believes in one God, yes.
I don't think that's what Catholics mean by that, but
well, I mean, again, so Paul accuses me of trolling. I'm not trolling, but I am trying to explain things in ways where people will actually understand the novelty of what I am trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And sometimes if you just sugarcoat things and say it in a way where, so I don't think Paul is Roman Catholic.
Of course.
Paul
Dutch Catholic.
He's Dutch Catholic.
Does he, in other words, does he believe that he really is part of the church? Or is
he
it
believes
just sort of
he's part of a Catholic church, yes.
Yeah.
And that's why, he says, Gar says, Jacob explains things by trolling. And Emma says, it's not trolling, it's punning. Totally different. if you believe in one God, then you care about people being in right relationship with God.
Yeah.
And your belief in the church is like, and frankly, I don't even like using the term the church, right? But your belief in halacha, right? Walking with God. Oh, Laura needs to jump in here. Laura would be great in this discussion. Laura, you have to jump in. Either you or Emma, or both.
Well, let me make my criticism of your Catholicism, Jacob. And I kind of brought this up in the comments, but how can you believe in a Catholic God but also have this weird priesthood that is somewhat hereditary, and I don't know, it's easier for me to accept a priesthood that is, chosen by yourself and,
chosen by yourself as opposed to God. See, okay, no, I totally hear this. And part of the thing that I've been experiencing over the past 2 years is a more true belief in Judaism than I had 20 years ago when I was actually like dressed like a Hasidic Jew, which is I also found it very uncomfortable to think of a hereditary priesthood. And I mean, within Judaism, we certainly have this concept of conversion, right? So somebody can choose to become a part of the priesthood in a sense. But actually, within Israel, right, some people are born to the Aaronic priesthood and some people are not. And I have really started appreciating the idea of no, a priest as servant cannot be someone who chooses. I like the idea of a vocation, right? But if you get to choose, right? Honestly, if I got to choose, I would not be Jewish. I definitely would not be Jewish. I would call myself a Noahide. I would I would be so much happier as a Noahide, right? But this is the job that I have been given. And it can only be a valid priesthood if it is involuntary. And you feel the same way because the reason you don't want to be ordained a deacon is because you feel that it's something that is your doing as opposed to something assigned to you.
There's got to be a joke in here about assigning gender. Like you're only the true gender when you choose it for yourself.
Whatever happened to free will or whatever?
No, you only have the choice to turn towards God or turn away from God. That is the only choice that ever exists. Everything else is simply a manifestation of turning towards God and turning away. So I go back to my question. If God wants you to go to hell, where do you want to go? And I asked this question of Catherine's brother, Scotland, the abbot of the abbey in Thunder Bay. And he completely scoffed at it. He's like, I don't choose to think of God in that way at all. My God would never want me to go to hell, so I'm not even going to think about it. And it's like, then your God is you.
Do you have a distinction between priesthood and, you could say, saintliness? Or...
Of course. Look, I don't... there are in fact Noahides, right, who are far more saintly people than I ever will be, right? When I say that I am a member of a hereditary priesthood, right, I say it in complete understanding that I am a really bad member. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Jacob. What is going on here? On your server, I saw that you were doing something called Why Paul VanderKlay is Catholic, and I just had to come over, but I've only been here for like 1 minute, so you got to bring me up to speed.
Did you listen to Emma's discussion with Paul?
Yes. Yeah, most of it. I haven't finished it yet, though.
And you remember the part where Paul asked her, should I be Catholic?
Oh, I think is that towards the end, because I've listened to like probably half of it or a little over half, so I haven't made it there yet.
Okay, I'm gonna actually play this over again. Did I close it? I think I closed it. Shoot, I closed it. Well, I would play it over again. No, there it is. Okay, I do have it. It was right around here.
I don't know how to like pick one.
When I talked to Jordan Peterson, I had a list of 5 points, and I said to myself, I'm going to get at least 4 of these points in my half hour was really sneaky. It's your challenge. This is it. You have all those points. You're going to try and make me Catholic?
No, I don't have anything to say that people haven't said to you before. I'm almost certain. Like, I was.
Well, you have. Your whole story is nothing that people have said to me before, so.
Well, yeah, but not in terms of like arguments for why you should be Catholic or something. Unless
should I be Catholic?
Is one of those. I think it would be better.
Really? Tell me why.
Because I mean, I can give you the like catechism explanation.
Your catechism's a lot longer than mine.
That is actually, did I know that? I don't think I knew that.
Heidelberg catechism is about this big.
It makes sense, but I didn't know that. Funny story. I didn't think Calvinists were still a thing until I got to college. I thought they died out like Puritans.
They haven't yet. They're on their way.
Well, I was raised being very suspicious of Catholics. You know, they had statues, but at least in New Jersey, the Catholic girls looked really hot. So you know, it was one of these things. All these Italian Catholic girls.
They'll get you.
Yeah.
I mean, not you apparently, but plenty of people.
They didn't get me. No.
Wow, that was pretty good. Yeah, I haven't gotten to that part yet. I've been listening to bits of that interview while I do the dishes and drive around and stuff, so I'm not there.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think Emma really shows you what a difference a classical education makes.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and again, I think Paul even asking that question is part of his Catholicity. So I was telling Emma before this was released, you can't make Paul Catholic. Paul is already too Catholic to become Catholic.
It was funny that he asked. As if it's on his mind, huh?
I don't know that it's on his mind. It's like Paul is too Catholic to change his churches. His grandfather was a CRC minister. His father was a CRC minister. He's a CRC minister. If the synod today, voted, we are going to join the Catholic Church, Paul would be like, okay, I'm a Catholic now.
Have you thought about a different word than Catholic, Jacob? I mean, we're letting you get away with it. It's making up your own definition. I don't think anybody agrees with that, with your definition.
Yeah, but if you listen to the conversation, I think you understand
I understand what
how
you
I'm
mean.
using it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, if the CRC voted tomorrow, right? They're going to join the Anglican Communion. They're going to join the Eastern Orthodox. They're going to become Muslims. They're going to like become Zen Buddhists, right? Like tomorrow, Paul would be like buying himself these saffron robes.
Well, I guess I mean, if it was Zen Buddhist, I guess he'd say something like, as long as I can still believe in Jesus, sure. But I think he wouldn't do anything where he's not supposed to believe in Jesus. That kind of seems like it would be the non-negotiable.
I don't know where the negotiables and non-negotiables are, where he would think that the CRC has left. I mean, he does say that a Christian is somebody who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves.
Mm.
At the same time, Paul, he's taken vows just as deep as I think as anybody else of I serve my church.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so he would never, like, if he was during the time of Luther, right?
Right. I see where you're going with it.
I guess if his particular church, the first time I encountered this was this very nice young man who's now a missionary in Africa, as far as I know. Last time I talked to him, came on Bridges a meeting, and we spoke to him. I spoke to him for a little while, right? And he said, yeah, I guess I'm some form of Protestantism. Like, what's that really old one that, like, they were, like, the first Protestants? Like,
Hussites?
Moravian?
Okay,
oh,
yeah.
Moravians?
Moravians, I think so. Like, he said, I guess we're Moravian now? I'm like, what do you mean you guess? He's like, well, my church voted. I said, yeah, but which way did you vote? And he said, yeah, I voted no. I said, okay, so why did you change? He said, well, because we took a vote.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But you weren't, like, your
Yeah,
church,
I get it. Yeah.
Your church changed denomination, and you're like, well, okay.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Right. There are some people who will go along with that happily, and there are other people who will have to do their own thing.
Well, he wasn't even like, so there's a level of, there are some people who, for the psychological pain, will convince themselves and will claim that, yes, I will, like, yes, I agree and I submit, but then there are people who are like, yeah, I don't agree, but that doesn't matter because this is my church.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the senses in which I think Paul is very Catholic, whatever that means.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I can see it. Do you think we're gonna get Paul to come on? Think he's gonna see this?
Paul is
this
way
title
too
and hop
busy
on?
today. Honestly, I'm too busy. I have like a lot of things I should be doing. But did you see the CRC discussion on
Which
his
one?
channel? So he had one about.
I saw the one about married couples who wanted to be married just in the church, but not by the
Right,
state.
not that one. Yeah,
Okay.
that one was just.
And there was one about protesting women being at the classes. Was that the one?
No, not that one either.
Okay. Wow, there are a lot of these.
Yeah. So this one, CRC NA Synod 2023, Reverend VanderKlay goes to Synod and how God loves his little flock.
Yeah, I haven't watched that one.
You did watch it? Okay.
No, I have not.
Oh, you have not.
Mhm.
Yeah, that one. Sandy called it the Mr. Smith one, and it is kind of like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Okay, I'll watch
So
that one.
it's honestly, it was painful.
Uh-oh.
It really was. And last night during Tim's Bible study, Father Stephen showed up, and he was kind of agitated by Synod, and I didn't understand why until, and I actually briefly spoke to Paul this morning, and I didn't understand what Paul was saying either until I watched that little tidbit, because what happened, I mean, I can't play the full thing, but and it's worth watching. It really is. It may be one of the most important things that Paul. It's funny. So the Synod was set to. So somebody had made an overture saying, "Okay, our church is dying, and we need to acknowledge this." A third of the CRC is 2/3 of the size it was 20 years ago. And it's like possibly going to fracture over so the CRC might actually be done. And this overture was kind of like a thing of we need to, and he actually, the guy who made the overture. You know what? I'm gonna see if I can find where the guy who made the speech regarding. So this is an hour and 18 minutes.
I might be able to get to it tomorrow.
Let me see if I can find.
And if my husband comes home,
Yes.
I'm gonna bail because.
You're gonna bail on us? This is the most important thing in the whole wide world. Far more important than like your husband and kids. Like something on the internet where people are discussing theology of a church they don't even belong to.
Exactly.
Like, literally 0 of us are members of the CRC.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. I don't like it when my husband works hard all day and then he comes home and I'm like, oh, distractedly, hello, honey. I'm watching a bunch of randos on the internet talk about the Christian Reformed Church.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, that's so much more important than your own husband. I mean, I don't understand. Where's your relevance realization, Laura?
Yeah.
So yes, that is perfectly fine if you actually go and attend to real life. I think this is
So I'm standing to speak against the motion that Synod consider this to be our response to Overture 12.
So what happened was he made an overture. The Synod had a committee, and the committee kind of brushed him off. Okay? And so the vote is coming down to people basically just like voting for the brush off from the Synod, right? It's like, oh yeah, we heard you. Okay, go away, right?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. First, with regard to our times of worship, I think even in our last singing and reflection on Psalm 46, we're speaking about what we really believe about God, that even in the darkest times, the most difficult times, God's a refuge and a strength. Therefore, we will not fear. Undoubtedly, perhaps in this room, even I think this. I'm the person who's compiled all the statistics. And maybe there's an error where we say to ourselves, this isn't something we're good at. You know, when it comes to evangelism, this might not be something that we think is one of our strengths. But even though it might not have been, I believe it can be. The CRC is a denomination that believes in the gospel. And we believe in the sovereignty of God, a God who can turn things around, a God who's on a mission. And by the way, if we're Christians, then we're on a mission. Because Jesus said, go and make disciples. I, at least, have a dream that the Christian Reformed Church will start being known for something. We've been in search of an identity for a long time. And I think we ought to be known for the gospel of Jesus Christ, the powerful gospel that can change lives. And we ought to be known as the church that carries out the Great Commission. We can do that better than anyone else, or as well as anyone else. So I think about God's command to Joshua. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Don't be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. We shouldn't look at what's happened to our denomination and say, well, let's have a good discussion about it. Let's lament that we've been in decline. But we can celebrate that some good things are happening and we can hope for a better future. It's time that we said to ourselves, no, we've got to come together. And the purpose of this overture was to say to all of us, it's time to make this a top priority. There's a lot of things that people came here to talk about. I came for this. It's time that we as a church embraced that we have a unique role to play in the Great Commission. And there are people in the world who need us to step up. And we've got to come together. We have to have a plan to make this a top priority. We have to embrace this together. And for that reason, I urge us to vote no on number 5.
So this isn't the part where he said it, but he said, I can't believe I'm saying this at Calvin University, but I'm a Calvinist. People use being a Calvinist as an excuse. Basically, he called it theological nihilism, the way I do, right? In different terms. And he's like, people use this as an excuse. They're like, oh, well, we're Calvinists, so we don't have to do anything, right? Our church is going to, if God says our church is going to die, our church is going to die, right? And this little speech of his sparked possibly the most like heartfelt, although weirdly Protestant and woke, like outpouring of Christian testimony that I've ever seen in CRC circles. And so they voted down the committee recommendation, and it completely like synod. And this is like Paul being who he is. He's like, see, God made this happen. And it's like, yeah, Paul, God made this happen, made Calvinists stop being so Calvinist. Another L for Calvinism. But I mean, it also started making me think, like, why do I care so much about the CRC Synod? Obviously, I'm not CRC, right? But it's because I, in a sense, envy Paul's Catholicity. And by Catholicity, I mean a belief in one God who moves the world in all its ways, right? Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, like, why is Paul so different from basically Calvinists? And part of it is he always, whenever I challenge him on the doctrine of Calvinism, his response to me is, well, Calvinists sure don't act like you say what Calvinism means, right? Mm-hmm. And I think from outside, when you compare a description of the Catholic doctrine and the Calvinist doctrine, I think it's pretty obvious I completely reject the idea of double predestination. And I do believe it's very, very anti-Bible teaching. But Paul comes from a position of, he learned the Bible from a Calvinist position, and therefore he's had to make sense of the Bible, of Calvinism through the Bible. And that's why his Calvinism is actually very Catholic. I think he has reinterpreted John Calvin in ways that I think John Calvin would actually not recognize himself.
That's entirely possible. I like his reinterpretations, though.
Oh yeah, his reinterpretations are almost biblical.
Yeah, Paul's definitely my favorite Calvinist of all time.
And that's why I had him. Did you see the thumbnail for this for this?
Yes,
stream?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. So
he was wearing a Pope's hat.
He was wearing a triregnum, yes, and a chasuble, yes. Did you see his speech where he was wearing my my prayer shawl?
I don't think so. Was it Chino?
Yeah, he looks pretty good in it. Let me see if I can find it. He looks pretty good in that.
Or maybe it was one that I listened to, but I didn't see it.
Where do I find it?
I listen to them on podcast apps a lot instead of watching YouTube.
Are you from the Midwest, Laura?
I am. Why do you ask?
Your laugh reminds me of my aunt's.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Wisconsin.
Oh, wow. Yeah. My dad's side is from Indiana, so.
Uh-huh.
Crosspoint, CRC Chino. Found it. Let me see if I can find the video where he. I thought I found it. Was it only 2 weeks ago that we had? No, it was 3 weeks ago. There he is. Okay. This is Paul wearing my prayer shawl.
Oh, okay. And yeah, I might have listened to this without actually seeing it. Yeah.
Poor guy. It's actually kind of difficult if you've never worn a prayer shawl before to wear it correctly. And it almost fell off of him, but I tried to warn him how to do it before. So yeah, it's kind of hard if you don't know how to do it. And he did it pretty well, and he looks pretty good in it, I have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty good. I should probably go. But Jacob, are you going to DC?
I am not going to DC.
Mm-hmm. I guess if you just went to Chino, you're partied out, huh?
I'm beyond partied out. I am also going to the Lord of Spirits convention in Pennsylvania on Reformation Day. And then you know about Jerusalem, right?
I do. So I'll be tied up on Reformation Day.
But you can come to Jerusalem.
I could maybe come to Jerusalem, and I'm kind of thinking I could go to DC if I can find a cheap place to stay.
Well, I don't know if you can stay with him, but if you do go to DC, Yosef is having a Friday night dinner where he's inviting a bunch of people.
Okay.
Yeah. And Spencer is an acquaintance of mine, not a close friend or anything, but he is in it. Spencer Clayton.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And his husband, Josh. I'm actually probably closer friends with Josh than I am with Spencer. But Josh is a Calvin graduate.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So the whole gay marriage thing was very, very personal to Josh.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to split. But yeah, like if anybody wants to like send me money or offer me a place to stay in DC, then maybe I'll go. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thanks for stopping by.
Talk to you later, Laura. Yes, Andrew, shouldn't you be doing homework? Oh no,
Yeah.
that's me. Tim actually said to me, somebody needs to tell you to stop live streaming and go do
You
your
need a
homework.
Jacob in your life.
Yeah.
Did I mention that George Papalius and I met? George Papalius was there when I met Paul VanderKlay.
So he knows Paul.
Yes, in fact, his son-in-law was there. He was talking about his son-in-law, who was a Protestant pastor, was also there in his capacity as a Protestant pastor.
I see.
And that's where I met Paul, and that's where we had a discussion with Father Chris and Paul, and yeah, that's where it all came together.
So it's funny, but it was George talking about the Septuagint, about the Masoretic text being from the 6th century. He summoned Father Stephen. Yeah, that Father Stephen's like, okay, I have to put an end to this.
Oh, that was great. It was great. I hope George went back and listened to it. You know, I texted George, I was like, hey, did you listen to the rest of it? He hasn't responded yet.
Oh, I told he's got to listen to the 6-hour first edition. I mean, if he's going to talk about the Septuagint,
I could tell. So George, you know, he like you said, he's done a lot of reading on his own, but I don't think he's had lots of opportunities to talk about this stuff,
right.
And it kind of shows, doesn't it?
Well, kind of. Although I have to say, I think he's spoken to like. Everything he was saying is the type of thing that I expect in a Greek church for people to say and lots of people to nod around along with. Mm-hmm. Right? Like he's not the first person to tell me that like the Masoretic text is from like hundreds of years after Christianity. You know, that right. The fact is, before the Dead Sea Scrolls, that was a pretty popular opinion among Christians. Yeah, and there are definitely people who still attempt to defend it, but yeah, it's just.
I just mean like he was so excited.
Oh,
he was so excited to talk to you guys. You know, It was great.
I just thought that he was a blabbermouth like I
am. He yes and no. He was just really stoked.
Well, nobody's as much of a blabbermouth as I am.
Yeah, that was good. That was fun.
So how close are you to getting rid of all the mildew in your bathroom?
I've not made a ton of progress since we went on our week-long vacation. I mean, all that stuff is cut out now, but I haven't made a ton of progress because we went on our vacation and we've been focusing on buying this house. But now it's down to the wire. Like I got 2 weeks, so.
Right, because you're gonna have to rent the place.
I've still got bare studs and everything. I'm setting the electrical up, and I got the plumbing done. So a lot of the tough stuff is done. But then after that, I've got to install it's a big project.
Wow, I wish I had 1/10 of the type of skill that you do. I would probably become a handyman or something.
My dad didn't necessarily teach me how to do stuff, but definitely gave me the confidence to try stuff. And that's how you learn how to do things, is you just try it.
Jeremy, if you're listening, if you could just tell me how you found my channel, and because I don't know you, if you could just put in a private chat how you found the channel, and I just want to make sure you're not going to porn bomb my channel. Okay. Oh. Former Mormon, now Orthodox. Aha.
Hello.
Yes. Jeremy. How are you, Jeremy?
I'm well, thank you. Let me turn down the volume.
Firth,
yep.
Where are you from?
Utah.
Which flavor of Orthodox are you?
Antiochian, like Father Stephen.
Aha, yeah, we did. I'm sorry, like I've, believe it or not, my brain cannot hold more than 100 people in it at one time, and I've started knowing more than 100 people.
That's fine. No problem. No, I know you got a lot on your plate. You remember a lot of stuff. You know, like 6 languages. I know. I don't even know English very well, so no problem.
So have you actually watched any of my Mormon stuff?
Yes, I have. Yeah, but it's been a few weeks ago, so I don't remember it very well either.
It's perfectly fine. I'm shocked you even watched.
Well, you recommended that I do, and I was really interested in hearing your take on it. And yeah, I've been talking with I have a friend who's a catechumen in the Orthodox Church, and he has Mormon friends who are trying to convince him that Mormonism is the way. And so he's been kind of bouncing stuff off of me, and we've been talking about it, because I have the former Mormon, but my Mormonism is all 20 years ago, which in Mormon time is a lot of things have changed.
This is true. It's funny. I was talking to Father Stephen actually last night about the LDS. Oh, really? After the stream.
Oh, okay.
Because I was because we were a little bit talking about this exact thing of the CRC seems to be dying, because I think through the grace of God, Calvinism is kind of dying.
Yeah.
And I brought up, so even though I don't, as much as I think I should, go to services at my local ward, I was explaining why I go to my local ward. And I was like, I'm not there because I believe that the LDS is true, or President Nelson is a prophet, or
Yeah.
I go because I do have a feeling of responsibility for the people who are in the LDS, who are very good people.
Yep.
And the LDS may be, so my joke, why did God create Mormons? So Christians know how Jews feel, right?
Nice.
So
that's funny. That's a good joke.
So the calling I had when I was in Salt Lake City, at the Great Salt Lake, was I thought to myself, yeah, that is why I think God created Mormons. Because I think that the LDS is that crack in the dark glass that, this is Jacob's greatest hits, but
sure.
I believe that Christianity is Judaism viewed through a glass darkly. And I believe that, the rest of the world needed to be introduced to the ideas of the Jewish Bible through Christianity, because it could not withstand the actual light of Judaism. And I'm quoting Paul of Tarsus when I say, like, Christians view the light as through a glass darkly. And I seriously think the LDS, it is a religion that appears absolutely constructed to fall apart at this moment, because it is so propositional. It is so absolutely propositional, and its history is just so completely, like, the internet is ravaging the LDS. It really is.
Yes. Well, they lived and died by narrative control, right? And once the internet showed up, that all went out the window. They completely lost narrative control, and now they've gone through such a transformation that I barely recognize it, let alone my mother, who's a boomer. right?
Mm-hmm.
Like my mother grew up in a very different Mormon church than she goes to now, right? So I feel very similar to you in that I'm working on a book. It's really interesting because they released a book back in November called An Introduction to Ancient Christianity for Latter-day Saints.
Mm-hmm.
And they released it through their apologetics organization, which is called the Maxwell Institute. And it's like they used to teach the great apostasy. Like I was a missionary. I went on a Mormon mission for 2 years in Toronto, Canada.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And when I was on my mission, we taught the great apostasy, right? Like the whole Christian church fell away and Joseph Smith restored it, right?
I barely hear the restored gospel of Jesus Christ anymore. That's what.
Yeah, they're really backing off of that message.
Yeah.
Really bad.
Yeah.
And now they're basically just saying, okay, just the priesthood was taken, but a lot of the practices of the early church were very, like they said, we look upon it, and this is a quote from the book, we look upon many of those practices with holy envy, which I don't know if there is such a thing, but they coined that phrase to say that they look upon it with holy envy. And they were talking about icons, they're talking about liturgy, they're talking about the sacraments of the church, right? And they're introducing Mormons to early church fathers, basically. And to a lot of the early church writings and practices. And I have the same idea. I'm working on the same project, but through an Orthodox lens. Like, here, hey, Mormons, here's where you are. Here's what Orthodoxy has. It's not a big step, right? It's really, in a lot of ways. Now, theology, obviously, we've got some big steps in theology, but as far as like the day-to-day, let's put it this way, my life as a Mormon, especially as a Mormon missionary, prepared me to be a better Orthodox Christian, right? The daily scripture study, the prayer before every meal, prayer before every activity, emphasis on the family. We had weekly family night. I mean, we had family home evening was what it was called, where
I love it. On Mondays,
games, playing together. We'd go out together as a family. It was great. It was beautiful. It's wholesome, right? Like I have no problems with any of those things. I'm very grateful because I was taught, like I had early morning seminary is what we called it, where you get religious instruction for an hour every day when I was in high school and then in college, where, and we were reviewing Old Testament, New Testament, Book of Mormon, and the Doctrine of Covenants, right? So it was a great foundation, and I feel like, I fell away from the church for many years. I fell into the whole Dawkins God delusion, atheism nonsense, but I fell through mysticism into materialism. So I fell out of Mormonism into Zen and Taoism, largely because I watched The Matrix. And that opened my mind up to mysticism, right? And then I started having mystical experiences, and I couldn't really make sense of them in the Mormon world. And I saw that the current Mormon church, like I was at a point where it was like, I either need to become a fundamentalist Mormon and go to polygamy, or I'm walking away because this is crazy. Like what's going on right now has nothing to do with what it started as, right? Or very little.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went through the whole atheism thing, and then through Jordan Peterson, like everybody else's story, right now, through Jordan Peterson reintroducing us to the Bible in a new way. And saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be so prideful. Maybe we should give this a chance and let it speak to us in its own language instead of trying to force it into modernism.
Mm-hmm.
And then through Jonathan Pajot being introduced to Orthodoxy and symbolism and the symbolic worldview and traditional worldview, the medieval model, I was like,
so how long ago were you baptized
into Orthodoxy?
Yeah.
About 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
So I'm worse than a catechumen when it comes to Orthodoxy, because I don't know, even the stuff that I thought I knew is wrong. I don't know anything.
Have you read Religion of the Apostles?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've really enjoyed listening to you and Father Stephen talk. Like I've listened to all of your conversations. And it's been fascinating for me because I'm learning more about my orthodoxy through your response to his work. Right? Like you're saying, hey, what about this? And you're bringing these other elements of Judaism that he's familiar with, but most American, Christians, or, especially with a Mormon background where we didn't learn about anything about Christianity before 1830, other than the Nicene Creed was crazy. Right. Then I didn't have an introduction to these ideas at all, or these concepts, or this framework that Christianity grew up in. Right. That's kind of how I view it. It's like Christianity grew up in the framework of Judaism. And to hear your, like I quote the example that you shared about reading in the Gospel of John, where he's speaking to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees were like, we've never been in bondage. And you said you almost fell out of the chair. You were just like, what? And Father Stephen saying, that John is trying to show just how upside down the world was, like how far the
right.
So
that is an example I bring up a lot, because they don't just say we were never in bondage. They say we are descendants of Abraham. We were never in bondage.
So they're like explicitly tying it.
They are explicitly saying something. The only, the one way I've been able to kind of explain this is it's like a Christian saying, we've been crucified with Christ, we've never died. Right? It's like,
yes, yeah, right.
What exactly are you saying? Right?
Yeah.
So yes, this is part of the ongoing.
It's like saying I'm a Mormon, but I've never had green Jello. Green Jello with cottage cheese. Right. Anyway.
Really? They have it with cottage
I'm a
cheese?
Mormon, but I've never had funeral potatoes. You're like,
funeral
what?
potatoes, yes. Right.
That's a reference just for Mormons. Non-Mormons are like, what? Which is exactly what happens when non-Jews read what you're sharing, right? Like what you were saying. It's like we don't have that cultural context to catch just how significant that one statement was, right? Just how big of a that really was, right? That's startling. Like how shocking that is.
To
hear that.
There are many things in that, honestly. So one of the things, I used to always, in my discussions with Christians, I always assumed that Christians know their religion better than I know their religion. And therefore, when a Christian would say Jesus taught X, Y, and Z, I would be like, well, he must have taught X, Y, and Z. And one of the great shocks to me was, and I realized how audacious a statement this is, but I no longer assume that a Christian understands what Jesus was saying better than I do, because Jesus was speaking in a Jewish context. Same thing. I mean, we discussed this yesterday in the Bible study about marriage, right? So when Jesus says, divorce, was given because of the hardness of your hearts.
Yeah. So
there are Christians who take this and they're like, oh, well, he's obviously saying there's no such thing as divorce anymore, right? The Christians should never, ever get divorced. And within a context where there were people getting divorced left and right, and obviously we don't believe divorce is a good thing, right? So in a context, a lot of times I find what Jesus says in a Jewish context to be speaking against a belief that in a Jewish context he is speaking against Jewish heresies, which, without knowing the Jewish heresy that he is speaking against, you may fall on the other side and think, oh, well, he's speaking against this. And so the lack of context absolutely just completely, and
ruins your brain.
turns it into something else, and then
yes. Well, then we look at it from the modern point of view and the Protestant point of view, and like American civic religion, which is Calvinism, right? It's like framed in that way for us in America, right? Like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm agreeing with you in that that's been the most enlightening thing. And that's probably, the most enlightening thing for me is to find out that the Enlightenment was a bunch of bullshit.
So that's actually what I was going to say is exactly. Exactly. And so when you get Luther's further dropping of context, I believe there was a dropping of context just from the Jewish context to the Gentile context.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then there was a further deliberate dropping of context by Martin Luther.
Yes.
And then what you end up with is Seventh-day Adventists or the Witnesses, the JWs, or the LDS, right? A further dropping of context by a hyper-Protestant movement, right?
Yep.
And so
and to take that further, utopian movement, right? Like the LDS is a utopian movement, and it was one of many of the time. It was very much
apocalyptic.
I was going to say it was very much born in the spirit of the times, and it has maintained its character as I like to say it lives in the trailing edge of the Overton window. That's where the Mormon Church lives, because it always tries to stay relevant, right? So Joseph Campbell pointed this out really, really beautifully. He said you can trace the evolution of the emphasis of the Mormon Church by the height of by which building was the tallest building in Salt Lake City at a given point. He said when Salt Lake City was founded, the tallest building in Salt Lake City was the Mormon Temple, right? And the center of their lives was their spiritual life. He said, but then when the Transcontinental Railroad came in, they got civic aspirations, and they wanted to be taken seriously, and they wanted to be a state. They wanted to be a part of America. I mean, it's the most American religion that I know of, right? Like it's founded on the Enlightenment. I mean, like, they explicitly take in John Stuart Mill. Like, if Mormons believed in saints the way Orthodox believe in saints, the founding fathers would be Mormon saints, right? Like, they believe that the Constitution is divinely inspired.
Like, well, I mean, part of Joseph Smith, and this was a very surprising thing as I learned more of the history of Joseph Smith. Part of his aspiration was to be president of the United States.
Yes, correct. Yes, yeah. So let me play out this metaphor just all the way, because Joseph Campbell laid it out so beautifully. But he just said, so there was the Mormon Temple, but then when they got those civic aspirations and wanted to rebuild the kingdom of God on earth, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. And they saw America as part of that vision. They believe New Jerusalem's going to be in Missouri still, right? That's still in their scriptures. Then they built the Capitol building in Salt Lake City, and it's a smaller version of the Capitol building that's in Washington, D.C. It's just a smaller scale of exactly the same building, and it's on a hill, and it became the tallest building in Salt Lake at that time. But then as the church continued to progress, they gave up their polygamy to become a state. Then later on, they became bureaucratic. They became the corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is like the copyright notice that they use in the front of their scriptures even today. As they did that, they became a bureaucracy. And now, even to this day, the church office building, which is a huge modernist skyscraper, is the tallest building in Salt Lake City.
Really? It's higher than the state capitol?
Yes. Well, maybe not physically, like if you were standing on the building, but height-wise, yes.
Well,
Height-wise, yes, it's the tallest building, and by law, like by code, they will not allow anyone to build a building taller than the church office building.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I visited Salt Lake City. It was a very interesting place to visit.
I bet. It's always fun to hear outsider perspective. Like I grew up here, but I've lived outside the state as well, right? And I went through that kind of deep deprogramming of Mormonism, but there are certain aspects that you realize, are just wired into you, like the.
So how does your family feel about your conversion?
They're generally, well, let's put it this way. When I left the church, everyone was okay with it. Like no one was, well, there's one story, but for the most part, everyone was fine. But I get invited to a lot fewer family events now. And even now that I'm Orthodox, like, my daughter, like I have to go visit my family and I don't get invited. Let's put it that way. Right. Yeah. To like family reunions, stuff like that. But the hardest part for me was my grandfather, who I had just had, my daughter was just born, and my grandfather had suffered a stroke and he had lost his ability to use the right side of his body, and he was right-handed. So he came home and he'd been home for just like a month or so. He sat, and it took him 2 weeks to write me a letter with his left hand telling me I had broken the chain of my ancestors and that I needed to have my daughter baptized in the church, and I need to repent. I need to come back to the church. And I was still deeply atheist at that time. And that was still really painful. Like that was very difficult for me. But I didn't wake up from my pride at that point. And it took a lot more suffering before I was willing to, before I was willing to listen to the call, the voice.
So part of my experience with the LDS has been seeing things which I call it skating on a spiritual knife's edge. There are rituals which the LDS partakes of, which in one sense, if I wanted to, I could describe it as some of the holiest things you could do. Mm-hmm. And in some sense, I could describe it as the most dangerous thing you could do.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I have to say, baptism for the dead, right?
Yep.
In one sense, the idea of undergoing a ritual immersion in the name of your ancestors for the repentance of sin, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is actually a type of ritual that has incredible holy implications within Judaism. At the same time, inviting the souls of the damned into your body.
Yes.
Right?
Participate in that event. Yes.
It may be one of the most dangerous spiritual practices you could possibly partake in.
Yes.
And to have teenage boys and girls doing this may be the dumbest possible thing I can imagine doing to your children.
Yes. Yes.
And when I found out that young Mormon children who they cannot be admitted into the temple, but they do this on a regular basis. I mean, you must have done hundreds, if not thousands, of baptisms for the dead.
I would say hundreds, but yeah, definitely. I did it because I didn't live close to a temple when I was younger. So
in Utah?
No, I didn't live in Utah.
Okay.
I lived in Nevada, so it was like a 4-hour drive.
Okay.
So it was an event. Like it was a weekend, and we would go and spend the day in the temple.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, definitely, I did that multiple times in my teenage life. Yeah. And
where in Nevada did you live?
Elko.
Oh, nice. Okay.
No, it's not nice at all. I don't recommend
it. I love Elko.
There's one good restaurant
I never lived there.
It's called it's the Star. It's a Basque restaurant, and it's fantastic. And the food is served in a classic Basque way, which is big platters of food come out for the whole table and everyone shares. And before you finish that platter, 3 more platters have come out on the table and you leave for less than $100 for the whole table. It's unbelievable. Like, if you like lamb, go to the Star in Elko, Nevada. It's unbelievable.
I'll have to
Like,
remember that.
You just cannot find, and they have mutton, which is one of the very few restaurants in America that serve mutton anymore, which is older sheep. Any sheep that's older than years, mutton has pretty strong, distinctive flavor that most Americans don't like. But I
The
grew up
Ruby
on it, so I love
Mountains.
it. Yeah,
Ruby Mountains, one of the most beautiful places I've been to.
it is beautiful. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But anyway, so, but what I wanted to add a little context to what you're saying and say that part of the challenge for Mormons is that, so they have like a pretty rich symbolic language through their temple and through the ceremonies in the temple and even in their scriptures. However, because they cut themselves off from the Christian discussion and Judaic discussion almost completely until very recently, they have no context. And it's exactly what you're talking about. They're constantly playing with fire. They're constantly playing with very powerful rituals, very powerful symbolism in a way that they really don't understand. They just don't they don't understand it at all.
I never believed in demons the way I do now after having experienced the LDS.
Okay, let's unpack that. I would love to hear what you mean by that. Because I agree with you.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a little context before you I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you again, but for anyone who hasn't been to Utah, one thing that always startles people is when they come in October, there are 5,000 haunted houses in Utah. Mormons are obsessed with haunted houses. They love them because they have this, my pet theory is that they don't really talk about evil. They don't understand evil. They don't comprehend it. It's not really part of their theology. They don't really have a real understanding of demons or demonology or any kind of hierarchy of demons or how that works. They understand it exists, but that's it. That's as far as it goes. And because of that, there is a fascination among their young people with anything.
It's beyond that.
Yeah,
it's beyond that. Okay. I have to say that if somebody asked me for the address of where to find demons in Los Angeles, Mormon Temple, right there, like that's the address I would give them. It's about 2 miles away from me.
So now all of our Mormon audience just left.
But I have to explain that because I don't mean it the way a lot of Christians understand the word demon. Because in reading Joseph Smith's first encounter, and that's what I was trying to explain to Lee Baker in my discussion with him, I am convinced that Joseph Smith actually saw something.
I agree with you.
And I think he was essentially correct in some of his analysis of what happened, which is he says he was attacked by evil forces and he called out to God and he believes he was answered. And I think he was saved from an attack because, frankly, it appears his family was very involved in witchcraft.
Yes.
And
see, and I'm going to differ with you there. I don't think he was saved from an attack. I think what showed up was not what it said it was, but I definitely believe something showed up because the other thing, so in Orthodoxy, we talk about prelest, right? Spiritual delusion. And one sign of that is if you believe yourself worthy to be visited by angels, you are opening yourself up to demonic visitation. And Joseph Smith explicitly says in his own words that I was praying fully expecting to be visited by angels because of my efforts and my repentance. Right. And I'm not quoting, but I'm but essentially that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. I believe that he was caught up in the spirit of the times, had some people around him who were very knowledgeable and educated, but also opened himself up to demonic visitation and was misled by those demons, but did not have the spiritual discernment to understand what he was dealing with.
Right. I completely agree with you.
And I would say the evidence that I use and that I've actually collected, and this is part of this was part of the earlier work I was working on, which was a little more polemical, probably too polemical, which is why I pulled back on it. But comparing the first vision of Joseph Smith with theophanies from the Old and New Testament, and if you start comparing those models, there are similarities, but there's some distinct differences between what Joseph Smith explained happened to him and what we read about in theophanies in the scriptures.
Adam, I'm assuming you're a Mordo 45?
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured. That's why I let you on. So what did you want to say? Adam?
Oh, you muted again.
Can you hear me? I don't think you can hear me. Now you're muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So what did you want to say? Go ahead.
Well, I'm just another LDS person that lurks in the community a little bit. So since I saw Jeremy
are you
talking,
currently in the LDS?
I would say I'm what you call deconstructed. I know that word is used a lot. What does that mean? But I've actually been to an Orthodox service. I went a few months ago, and but I can't quite get to, my LDS background still holds me back from a lot of the things I would normally see in an Orthodox perspective, I think, but I certainly was intrigued by it. Jonathan Pajot, Jordan Peterson, the whole thing, just as everybody else.
Yeah.
So I don't know if either of you know Ethan Bowen. He's involved in the community. His wife just had a baby, and he's also trying to negotiate this whole being from an LDS background and possibly becoming Eastern Orthodox. Yeah.
How long have you been listening to the conversation, Adam?
I think about an hour, maybe, or half an hour.
Okay, so you've caught the most recent exchanges we were talking about, like
most of it. Yeah. I mean, I was following Jordan Peterson from the very beginning. Came to Paul VanderKlay through that, Jonathan Pajot, I think the main issue for me really comes down to Jesus. I can't often get to a traditional view of Jesus without the LDS understanding of, why did he come when he did and what happened to people before he came? Is there justice in God that God would come 2,000 years ago, but leave several thousand years of people without knowledge of him? And I think what Joseph Smith was trying to get to was, what's the justice in that? Maybe we have baptism for the dead, like you were talking about, to try to make up for that.
Have you seen the icon of Christ harrowing of hell? The harrowing of hell. Have you seen that icon?
I don't think so. No. I mean, I've just delved a tiny bit into.
Sure. So that might be something you might want to look at. And it's the idea. So this is
he went to hell during the 3 days. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So when he was on the cross, he went down into hell and broke the bonds of hell. He broke the doors down, basically, if you see it in the icon. And he freed everyone who's there. So in the icon, you usually see him lifting up the hands of Adam and Eve. And then there are other saints and prophets who are there as well. Like David is usually there. You usually see Jonah, or you usually see, a few other of the prophets. And it's the idea that he went down and he took away the sting of death, right? Like he broke the bonds of hell, and he rescued everyone who was there at that time, right? So that's very much along with Orthodox theology and Orthodox teaching. And I also want to say I am not a spokesman for Orthodoxy. Like, I don't know anything, so I'm only speaking. Like, it's better to talk to an Orthodox priest, because I'll probably say something stupid and wrong, and it would be best to talk with them. But in the meantime, I'll try to point you in some directions that you can at least explore.
Yeah.
So where do you live, Adam?
Texas, Dallas area. Yeah. So it seems like a lot of people in the corner of California or the Northeast, Chicago.
We have quite a few people in Texas, though.
Texas, I think there's a few I've seen, but
yeah. So Michael Sartori is in Texas. Well, actually, Eastern Orthodoxy seems to be pretty strong in Texas nowadays.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
A different Ethiopian, a lot of them. But you can get Greek, all sorts of Orthodox churches.
You know, Adam, there's something else that occurred to me that I wanted to share with you, and it was this idea that, so we might view it a little
Just
differently.
1 second, I have to plug my computer in.
Oh yeah, of course.
Right.
Sure. Well, this is fun.
Yeah. So Raj wants to know how Trey's always driving.
I'm always going places. I did want to mention, no, just traveling the world, roaming the earth. I did want to mention, Jeremy, it's interesting that the little things you mentioned, because I used to be a Jehovah's Witness, and there's some things lining up, like the mentioning you meet once a week all to get together as a family. I'm like, oh yeah, that was a thing. We did the same thing. So yeah, and a lot of what you mentioned, the idea of being disconnected from Judaism as well as Christianity, I relate to that a lot. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, no, it's a little sad, because it's like being handed a book of calculus without knowing math. You know, it's like, hey, here's all this calculus and here's all these mathematical symbols, and you're like, well, I know a little bit, like I know how to add and subtract stuff, but the jump, you know, there's nothing connecting the two. Right. And so then you're just left trying to figure it out by reading. And we all know how fraught with error that process can be.
Especially when you're reading the King James Version in English.
Without the Apocrypha. And
without anything.
Right.
And I mean, also, I have to point out, for a very long time, I mean, we're used to everybody having a Bible that includes the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
But there were plenty of people who only had Bibles that only had the New Testament in them.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Or like the old Gideon Bible, I still have one that has the Psalms, Proverbs, and New Testament.
Yeah.
Right. And many churches operated with that Bible, right? That's all they had. Yeah.
Printing, I mean, I think we underestimate how much printing has changed the world in just a lot of different ways. And for me, so this question Adam brings up of where is the fairness? You know, it's not simply a question of the Native Americans. It's also, for me, actually, I always talk about somebody in rural Tamil Nadu in India, right? Where they are surrounded by nothing but Hinduism, right? Which, I mean, if you were to take one religion that is clearly like outside the frame of what Judaism would accept as acceptable religion, at least some forms of Hinduism would very much, I mean, some of them are absolutely horrific in not just their idolatry, but also their like murder and sexual perversion and, you know, just absolutely horrible things, right?
Mhm.
And one statistic I found absolutely shocking is there are some 500,000 hijra in India today. And the hijra are basically this, I hate to be too graphic, but I think it's necessary. They are men who do not fit in society. So through the method of banding, you know how you constrict the blood until an organ falls off? They remove the entirety of their manhood and then basically become prostitutes. And prostitutes, beggars, and drug addicts, right? And there are some 500,000 hijra in India today, right? It is one of the most insanely immoral things to happen to human beings. And what's even more disgusting is in our current craziness, the hijra are their lifestyle is being idealized as acceptance of third genderism in such a way that completely misses the fact that these people are sex slaves. They are in fact sex slaves, right? But all of that to say, in a very real sense, I have to say, okay, so I, as a monotheistic Jew, where do I believe God is in the life of someone who is born in a situation where they become a hijra, and children fall into this lifestyle, this sex slavery at very young ages, right? And so for me, I always have to understand the suffering of each individual person as God created that human being in the situation that they are in. And in his infinite mercy and justice, what constitutes salvation for that person must be that which is infinitely just and infinitely merciful. And so there is no place in my life where I believe that, like, so for me, this concept of, oh, you eat pork, you're going to hell, is silly, beyond silly, right? You don't believe in my religion, therefore I judge you to be the type of person who's going to hell, right? And I have to believe that each person, right, God judges them according to the circumstances in which he placed them in, which he infinitely knows. Yep. Right? And that's why for me, there's actually a member of this community, his name is Krish. And so he lives in the United States and his parents are believing Hindus, but he could not believe in Hinduism. So he was looking into Christianity and Islam. And he is now a Noahide, which is a Gentile who believes in Judaism, because his main reasoning for that was, I cannot believe in a religion that says my parents are going to hell, because my parents are good people and they're Hindus. They're idolaters. They believe in Hinduism. but they're good people. And for me, my response to him was, there's nothing that says there's nothing in the Jewish concept of judgment which says, oh, no. In order to believe in the God of Israel, you have to believe that your parents and your grandparents and your ancestors for thousands of years all went to hell. Like, that's not how I believe God judges the world.
Right. I would agree with you, Jacob, and say that whenever God's mercy and justice are mentioned, mercy is always mentioned first, and that's not insignificant, because we don't. If we were subject to His judgment first, we would all be subject to His judgment, and there would be no hope.
There's actually a verse in Psalms which says exactly that. If you were to count man's sins, who would stand?
Yeah, exactly. And so I also believe that there are different ways of participating in God and God's love, and we can't comprehend His mercy. We can't comprehend His justice. We can't comprehend His love. We never will, but we can. But once it's presented to us, we can pursue it. And God is God. He's over all things. And this ties in a little bit to your question as far as like the view that Orthodoxy has of who God the Father is pretty significantly different than the Mormon view of who God the Father is, in that we don't believe that He's subject to the same physical laws we are. We do not believe that matter is eternal. We do not believe that that God just gained the office of God in the priesthood as a blessing for His obedience to the eternal laws. That's just not how Orthodoxy sees it. We see that God is both transcendent, which means He's outside time and space. He's outside of all category. He's completely incomprehensible and unknowable. And at the same time, and this is the paradox, is that He is also infinitely immanent. He is in all things. And we can experience Him and participate in His identity by living out His will, by trying to live out His will in our lives, and by seeing other people as icons of Christ.
Just to clarify for people who aren't as aware of LDS history as you and I may be, so before the 1930s, the Enlightenment scientific view of the world was that the world always existed, that it didn't have any sort of beginning, that the laws of nature always existed. And this was the deistic view that many of the most enlightened people had. And in response to this, and as a capitulation to the science of the time, the LDS cosmology became this very different idea of, oh, no, the laws of nature always existed. And God became God. And through His obedience to the laws of nature. And that's where the idea becomes that we can also become gods ourselves by our obedience to the laws of nature. And this was the scientific view 150 years ago. And that's part of the funny thing, almost ironic thing about the LDS, is it is such an empirical and Enlightenment religion that it adopted what at the time of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young were considered basic scientific views in contravention to what were religious views at the time. And now that this crazy religious idea such as the Big Bang Theory, and please, I invite anybody who is not aware of this to actually look up the history, the etymology of the word Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory was named by an opponent of the Big Bang Theory who thought that it was a religious intrusion by Catholic priests, and it was, into scientific cosmology of the creation story. And then we later found out scientifically that, oh, no, the Big Bang Theory is in fact the scientific way of viewing the world. And somehow it became flipped on its head. And now supposedly it's the religious people who are against the Big Bang Theory, and the Big Bang Theory is the scientific way of putting it. Mm-hmm. And this is part of how, honestly, it's like the LDS was designed supernaturally to fall apart in this particular time in which we live.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, and I want to tie just a couple of loose ends together that kind of bring this picture together for me. And one is that, yes, God is infinitely unknowable and outside of category and time and space, and we can never know him by his essence, but we can know him through his activity in our world and in our universe and participate in that. And we can come to know him through Christ, through a personal relationship with Christ. And obviously I differ with Jacob on that, but that's the Orthodox viewpoint.
In a sense, yeah. I mean,
true.
This is part of the discussion that I've been having with Father Stephen, in that I think the Christian sense in which they believe that it's uniquely through Jesus, as opposed to, I would say, any saint, is it's the privileging of Jesus as monogenes. And Father Stephen, he understands monogenes in somewhat of a different way. Obviously, I don't agree with his understanding of monogenes either.
Sure.
But his understanding of monogenes is actually a much more Jewish concept of yechid, of unique. And so, talking about writing books, even though, I mean, I've been wanting to write books ever since I was young, and I haven't written one yet. So I don't know if I will ever write one. But I've kind of been like batting around this idea of a book that I was going to call An Only Son, about Jesus, actually. But that's a very different concept of an only son than I think generally is the Christian concept.
Well, I would like to hear more about that shortly. But one other thing I was going to say was that it also ties into a little different view that we have of prayer in Orthodoxy that I learned about, which is the idea that through prayer we are participating in that activity and identity of God, and then that also the Orthodox view is that those who have died are not truly dead; their body is dead, but they continue to live, and that our prayers, they can no longer repent. That's where we differ with the LDS. We believe that they themselves can no longer repent. However, we believe that our prayers for them are efficacious and can be salvific. So we can continue to pray for our ancestors who have passed on, and they pray for us, but they cannot pray for themselves anymore. And that's the thing that Orthodoxy believes is what changes at death, is that we can no longer repent because we are separated from our body, and that we're not truly human without our body. And so without our body, we can't repent. But through the prayers of our loved ones and through the prayers of the church, we will be remembered, and that our final fate will not be determined until the final judgment, and that it will be a good judgment, like every knee shall bow, right? Every tongue shall confess that God's final judgment will be just and merciful, and that he will give us every possible benefit of the doubt in judging our final fate. So it's a little bit different of this is the fourth discussion when I was a missionary, as far as like where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going after we die. And the whole plan of salvation from the Mormon point of view is pretty significantly different from the Orthodox point of view in some very important ways. But it helped me ease some of the tension I felt as well over the whole eternal family and, ordinances for the dead, etc. The Orthodox would say we do believe that there's a normative path to God, but that God is, first of all, merciful and kind, and that his judgments will be just, and we don't know what those are. And so that our only focus is to focus on our own spirituality, our own relationship with God. And if we're looking at anyone else's relationship with God, it's a demonic distraction. I can't hear anybody. I can't hear you, Jacob. You're muted.
I am muted. So Father Stephen put it we can say that there is salvation inside the church, but that does not mean we believe there's no salvation outside the church.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, obviously, I would agree with Father Stephen.
I want to let Adam speak.
Sounds good.
Yeah, well, I would kind of, obviously, I probably differ a little bit. I'm a big fan of David Bentley Hart, who's obviously an Orthodox thinker. He would be more along lines I am, where, that maybe Jesus, and maybe along with Jacob too, that I see Jesus more as a more complete version of what it means to become one, or represent, as I guess Jacob would put it, what God is, but also would include other, people within all religions as at least partially or similarly connected to God. So I don't know what you think of David Bentley, if you've read any of his material. Obviously, he's a controversial figure in the Orthodox theological community. He's a universalist. So
yeah, that's where I differ with him primarily.
He's not the one who doesn't actually go to church, is he?
Yes, that's the issue I have with him, is that he's gotten a little Gnostic for my tastes, as far as like he's in his head, and I don't know his personal life. I don't know, but he has said that he doesn't participate in the life of the church, and for me, participating in the life of the church is more important than what you believe.
Right. Yeah. For me, it's like if you identify as an Eastern Orthodox Christian and you don't actually go to church, that makes me think of you a lot like you're transvestite.
Yeah, I mean, I just barely talked about judging other people, right? Yeah. So I don't know anything about, I don't know him well, but I am saying that just for me personally, I don't resonate with the things he says, because I find more medicine in the reading the lives of the saints and reading the early church fathers and participating in the life of the church. It's not just go to church on Sunday and then go home. It's like Orthodoxy is a very active part of your life, where you're praying and you're reflecting on scripture a lot and praying all through the day. And it's a as much as you can remember, you should be praying, right? And we're constantly distracted and forget, but that's because we're weak, not because we're not called to, right? So anyway, I think that's a really important part of Orthodoxy, is participating in it, right? It's like swimming. It's like learning how to swim by reading a book about swimming, right? Like there's a lot more to swimming than reading a book about swimming or writing a book about swimming.
Yeah.
I'll say the same thing about judgment. I always do. Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to the Lord, unto the Lord our God. But those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever. that we may do all the words of this law. And like, I can't say how God will judge David Bentley Hart's heart, and I wouldn't do that. At the same time, I think it's incumbent upon me to recognize that somebody who doesn't actually go to an Eastern Orthodox church isn't a member of that community, and it does not represent Eastern Orthodoxy, in my view.
Yes.
Yeah, totally agree. You don't have to talk to an LDS person to know the value of participation. You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
If anything, we're hyper focused on participation.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
you never get a disagreement from me there. I totally agree that one of the things that we always had a problem with, if you're LDS, is that you can just say you believe in Jesus and suddenly you're saved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, anybody who's LDS we always grew up believing that was not something we would tolerate, that there was a combination of, you had to do something. And of course, we're known for that, being more on that side. And so can't disagree with you there.
Yeah.
Where that balance is hard to find, but
yeah, that's true. How did you grow up LDS?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. And did you go on a mission?
Yeah, I went to Norway.
Oh, wow.
On a mission, yeah.
Oh, so that was a lot of cold, frustrating days.
Yeah, I'm originally from Canada, so actually but Norway is the same latitude as Alaska, basically north to south. So it's Arctic Circle above, but being from Canada, I already had experience with cold. But yeah, some of my forefathers are in the Doctrine and Covenants, actually in several of the sections. So if you remember the twins that died, and Joseph Smith, they took the kids. That was actually John Murdoch's kids. That my last name Murdoch was one of my forefathers. So right from the very beginning, we were many generations. But I'm one of those that has kind of looked at other.
So how did you end up in Canada if you're like old school LDS?
What happened is that Brigham Young sent various groups of members, basically north and south. So they went up to Canada and they went south to Mexico. So
you're saying your great grandfather had a pretty wife?
None of mine were ever polygamous, but and that's actually one of the myths about early Mormons. I think there was only a few percentile that were ever polygamous.
Yeah, no. The joke was about Brigham Young sending men on missions and marrying their wives. That he definitely did do, which was
Joseph Smith did that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, but in a way, I see. I'm no longer an active member of the LDS Church, but I think he saw everything is connected. Everybody is being intimately linked. You could say one if you were to use that term, like an interconnected web of people. And he took a lot of things literally. So he was a very literal reader of the Bible in a lot of ways, and was trying to make sense of things. The patriarchs in the Old Testament and how they had many wives and concubines. He was trying to make a lot of rational, a lot of sense of a lot of these things. And sometimes I can understand where he was going with it, but sometimes, what were all the motivations? Who knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what really gets to me is like, I mean, again, I highly recommend my conversation with Lee Baker, who was a former Mormon. He became an evangelical, and as an evangelical, he became an anti-Mormon missionary. and then he left the evangelical church, and now he's a Noahide. And so Noahides are Gentiles who believe in Orthodox Judaism.
Sure. Yeah.
And as such, he is incredibly, a lot of Noahides, unfortunately, are very bitterly anti-Christian. And what I tried to bring out in that conversation that I had with him was that ultimately that type of anger and what do I call it? Non-gratitude towards all of Christianity, whether it's the LDS or evangelism or, and I've been talking to Trey about this, his witness past or anything, we have to treat our life course as if we understand that God, in his infinite mercy, has set things up. And of course, we don't understand, right? This is the book of Job, right? We don't understand either the suffering of the innocent or the Shalvat HaRashaim. How do you translate Shalvat HaRashaim? The prosperity of the wicked. But that's because we don't understand, right? And we have faith that ultimately we will eventually understand. And so when I say, and I do believe that the LDS was in a sense established by a demon, that's not very different from me saying I believe it was established by an angel, because I believe that ultimately God has his purposes in everything that he does, everything he has created for his glory. And so I don't have a hatred and anger for the LDS. I think the LDS, I think anybody who's even partially, like, when you watch the South Park episode on the LDS, right? What do they make fun of the LDS for the most?
Being nice.
What? These
Being
people
nice.
are just so nice.
Yeah.
Like, they're infuriatingly nice, good people, right? And I am not surprised that nice, good people are being attacked by the forces of darkness. I think that's something that the LDS gets correct. Yeah. And so I have seen incredibly, just the fact, when people go on their missions, not only are they not being paid, they are paying to go on their missions. They are paying all their own costs, right? And they take very, this is an act of kindness on their part, right? I certainly understand there are people who feel forced by their parents and they themselves don't wish to go and stuff like that. But ultimately, the LDS has so much good in it. I think just writing it off as this demonic thing is to completely misunderstand it. Yeah. And it's kind of funny that we ended up having this discussion at the end of this particular broadcast, because that is what we were really talking about as far as Catholicity, right? and monotheism. And I do think the CRC, Christian Reformed Church, is dying, just like I do think the LDS, the Mormon Church, is dying. And frankly, my view, obviously not your view, I believe Christianity is in fact also going to have to die and be resurrected in a different form than it has existed. Because I do believe that Judaism is eternally true. But in Judaism, we call that ahava yetera. We call that an extra love that God has granted us, in that he gave us his Torah from the very beginning. And that's not something we earned. It's something that it is an extra measure of love that God has given Israel, for which we can only be grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually happen to agree with you that that Christianity is dying, but is resurrecting. In what we're seeing, a lot of these different political movements are, frankly, like we talk about, kind of resurrections of Christianity in perverse forms. But I happen to agree with a lot of what you say, Jacob, actually. But I'm not in a current, in a denomination where I have to adhere to any particular viewpoint. I think Christianity is dying in traditional sense, and will have to resurrect in some point, maybe along the lines of what Pajot talks about. And it's kind of built into the architecture of the story.
Mm-hmm.
I personally, when I read about Jesus, the reason I would still count myself, and I know this is heretical to say a Christian, you never call Mormons are not supposed to say that, but I think Paul's at least open enough to say that Mormonism is a form of Protestantism, and I happen to agree with that. That I read Jesus, I do see somebody as an exemplar, somebody that to me has more fullness of who I'd want to be and emulate than any other example I can think of. And so from at least that standpoint,
this is a little surprising to me. This may be somewhat new, but I thought a lot of what President Nelson has been accentuating, at least over the past few years, is that Mormons are Christians.
Yeah, but we're not seen as such you would never get a Protestant that would contemplate us as Christians. It's always Christianity versus Mormonism. Like if you go to YouTube channels or something where there's a discussion, whereas we would always say we're Christians. But I guess if you were to classify us, we would be just very heretical Christians.
I would put it this way. I typically most of Christianity don't view Mormons as Christians because the Mormons explicitly reject the creed, right? The Nicene Creed, the Nicene Cosmopolitan or I can't say that word.
Constantinople.
Thank you. Oh, my wife's Turkish. I really should say that word properly. But anyway.
Oh wow, my last name's Turkish. Did I tell you that?
No. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, my wife has her first name is actually Persian, but she's Turkish. But anyway, so they reject the creed, which is like the kind of the cornerstone or the foundation of what it means to be Christian according to most Christians, and the Mormons always say, well, according to who? And so that's where the argument starts. But I would say that Mormons show up on moving day. Mormons show up when someone's had a baby and they've got the meal train. Mormons shovel. My walk is always shoveled because I have Mormon neighbors. And I'm not Mormon, and they know I'm not Mormon. It doesn't matter, right? So as far as and the charity work, we're all familiar with that. As far as living out the Christian life, yeah, I think Mormons have as much claim as anyone I know. I mean, a lot of my close family members are still LDS. But when it comes to creed or some of the theology, then that's where we have some differences, right? That's where we would kind of differ. But to say, oh, you're not a Christian, or you're not, I mean, I don't, that's where you can't know someone's heart. But I do know that I work with a lot of Mormons who are much more involved in their faith than I am in mine. You know?
I have to go back to my joke. Why did God create Mormons? So Christians know how Jews feel. Like it works on so many levels. And in a very real sense, I mean, that's how I feel. Like, okay, I don't agree with many Christians as far as their various beliefs. But when it comes down to it, I don't care as much about what you say about the Trinity as whether you're a kind, good neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. By their fruit shall you know them, right?
That's right.
So I always take that, you know, when Jesus, there's this, I can't remember his name, is wandering around healing people, and the disciples say, what should we do with this person? And he says, he is not against me, is for me, right? So I'm obviously paraphrasing big time there, but
right.
You know, my issue is the same actually that you have with the Trinity, Jacob, is that there's no difference between 3 or 5 or 10 or 1,000. You know, what's the magic with the 3? It's the one and the many, right? And of course, the LDS view would be that they are one in many senses, just not.
You sound like you've listened to way too many hours of of Jacob's greatest hits. You really should find better things to do, Adam.
You know, I mean, that's actually present in LDS thought, though, because we have the degrees of glory. You know, there wasn't heaven and hell. There's actually degrees of heaven, meaning it doesn't make sense just to have two artificial designations if everybody's different and they're grades to everybody's lives. And so it makes no more sense to have heaven and hell than have degrees of heaven or degrees of hell. Like, so the same to me applies to the Trinity. Why can't it be 5 or whatever? I mean, I think the concept, I agree with the concept of the Trinity, the symbolism of it to me makes sense. But when you actually try to understand it literally, it obviously kind of just breaks down, for me anyway. But I can understand the unity and the multiplicity, as Pajot would say, I guess does make sense. LDS, we would say that they're one in heart and mind. You know, different personages, but of one heart and mind. So that's how they would characterize it. But I happen to agree with Jeremy that, you know, we were kind of taught that you know, God the Father is a personage of, you know, bodily form that's kind of like, you know, what you see Michelangelo depicting. You know, it's kind of like the gray beard in heaven, you know, somewhere. But I've tended more towards the traditional Christian view of that he's outside time and space and in and all through things. I don't understand how. I think Joseph was trying to make sense of that Jesus ascended and he had a resurrected body. So if he does, where is he? Right? We have a physical person. He's got to be somewhere. And if he's physical and he's one with God, well, God the Father has to have a physical body too. It's kind of hard to make sense of that. If you take that literally in an absolute sense that Jesus has to be somewhere physically in a bodily form such as we have, maybe slightly different. But
well, we do have the accounts that, you know, he appeared in locked rooms, right? Like in a room where the doors were locked, he showed up. So and he also could show up and talk to people and them not recognize him. So those kind of things like indicate that the resurrected body is very different than what we experience with our current mortal body, right?
Yeah,
it's a different thing, and we don't really know much about it. because we do have these strange accounts but he also ate fish,
Yeah, and they also touched him, right?
Yeah, Thomas touched him, put his hand in his side, so he could feel, but yet he could appear in a room that was locked, and he could talk to people and them not recognize who he was, right, for hours, right? Yeah. So something's going on there that we don't understand.
I agree.
Yeah,
that's one of those just mysteries. We can never know, obviously, fully, but
right. Yeah. Well, and I have a really interesting book that kind of helped me a lot with the traditional Christian view is On the Incarnation by Saint Athanasius. And he writes about how Christ coming into this world was the beginning and the end at the same time of healing of this world, right? Like him taking on the physical body, like entering into the physical creation by taking on a body is what healed this world. And he lays out why that's the case and how that's the case.
Well,
as well as we can know.
I hope it's not the end of the healing of this world, because it seems to me this world has a lot of healing to do.
Well, I'm saying that from a mystical point of view, and that like Christ is constantly being born. Christ is all like today he's being born, today he's being crucified, today he's being resurrected, because he is outside time and space, right? So, but he did enter history, and lived and healed this physical world through entering history. But that process has to play out in history as well. So it's complete and it's in progress, right? That's the kind of the Orthodox paradox. Like, well, Orthodox is all paradox.
Yes, this is a very common Christian paradox, and I have to say, I think it's a little simpler just to say he wasn't the Messiah.
Well, I understand your point. Point taken. But Jacob, I wanted to say, I have not listened to a lot of your shows outside of when Father Stephen shows up. He kind of is what draws me back to your channel. But I think your openness, your willingness to share what you have, to share your viewpoint, and for us to be able to have this beautiful, interesting, engaging conversation from three very different viewpoints is a gift that I can't thank you enough for. And I think this is the purpose of the internet, right? Because obviously the dark forces have taken the internet in very dark directions, but I do believe that it's a tool, and I believe that it can, it's in itself not, I don't believe it has a nature of good and evil, right? It's just a tool that can be used. And I think if it wasn't for the internet, I wouldn't be Orthodox Christian. I wouldn't even know what it was. I had never heard of it before. Only through Jonathan did I learn about it. But being able to have these kinds of conversations where we just share our viewpoints without debate, without, keeping score, and without like all of that stuff, that madness that that's a part of like, the Orthobro universe. Unfortunately,
it's so funny. I was talking to Paul VanderKlay briefly this morning, and I said to him, I don't know why people say I debate. Like, I don't debate. He's like, come on, Jacob, I listen to your things. You debate. Like, I don't debate. Because for me, like, apologetics and polemics, they're both like, they're both flip sides of the same coin, which is me trying to tailor my message to you so that you would agree with me, right? And when it comes to once when people were here, I said to them, I only speak logos. I don't know what you're talking about. Pure logos.
John chapter 1 is what reconverted me to Christianity, by the way. The prelude to John, I think, is the most profound thing I've ever read in my life. But anyway.
I mean, honestly, I do believe that John was originally a Jewish text and was later rewritten. But that's my very idiosyncratic view. I
understand. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, quite right. So one of the things that I pointed out to Paul in Chino was we have a Jewish law, a halacha, that Chamor Kedushat Beit HaMidrash Mikedushat Beit HaKnesset. There is a greater holiness in a house of study than there is in a house of prayer, right? So a synagogue has a certain sanctity to it. And the sanctity of a Beit Midrash, a house of study where people get together and honestly study the Word of God, right? Yeah. It is a higher sanctity. And I don't think the Jewish tradition has always lived up to what our hopes are for a Beit Midrash, for the house of study, for the willingness to speak and to debate and to recognize the truth in what other people have to say as much as we would like. Obviously, we are fallen people,
right?
But that ideal, right? That ideal that I am not afraid of the words you may speak. I am not afraid of the truth because I believe in the God of the truth. And if what you have to say is true, then I want to hear it. I mean, it really does go back to how I started this stream, which is Paul talking to Emma, and he's like, well, should I become Catholic? Like, what are your arguments for me to become Catholic? And he is platforming, right? According to modern lingo.
Our Marxist friends. Yeah.
Yes. He is platforming a Catholic and saying, okay, tell me what you believe. Go ahead, introduce me to what you believe. And I'm not afraid of what you have to say. I don't want to shut you up. I don't want to misunderstand you. I don't want to pervert what you have to say. I want to know God, which means I want to know truth. And I am willing to accept the truth, hopefully, from whoever speaks it. I mean, I have to kind of put in a plug here for Chezi and Ben on my channel have just started doing Pirkei Avot, which is the section of the Mishnah. It may be the oldest section of the Mishnah. And I would say it is quite likely, if not obviously, true that during the time of Jesus, at least the first 3 chapters of the Mishnah Avot were common sayings. They were known sayings around the time of Jesus. And I highly recommend to all Christians actually just spending some time with the Mishnah Avot. It's short. They are short summaries of the. I mean, it's written. The Mishnah is a mnemonic poem that rabbis were expected to memorize, and the Mishnah Avot included instructions to rabbis about how what is the basic thrust of the entirety of the Torah. And I think at least having read through Pirkei Avot gives Christians a much better understanding of what Jesus and Paul have to say in their Bible than I think. I would say I would say it's basic reading for a Christian. And they just started that this week. And
like they're teaching it, or we can like
they're going through it, yeah.
Oh wow.
Although both of them speak Hebrew, and there might be a lot of Hebrew.
Okay.
They're having the conversation at a level that might not come down to.
Sure.
I mean, you can.
Where can we at least read it, like a translation of it, or?
Oh, so it's all over the place. Just sayings of the fathers. If you Google sayings of the fathers, Chabad has a translation, Safari has a translation. There are, I mean, it's one of the basic texts in Judaism.
Okay.
Outside of the Bible, obviously.
And you said the first 3 chapters, especially.
Well, the first 3 chapters clearly, I would say, are from the time of Jesus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I would say Jesus would be familiar with the first 3 or 4 chapters. Chapters 5 and 6 maybe later. Yeah.
Gotcha. I will definitely look at that.
For sure. Yeah.
I think I might end the stream.
That's
I
great.
would like to give you guys the final word. Let me know how you would like to end the stream.
Go ahead, Adam. You had a lot of bravery showing up with a guy who said he's former Mormon. And we were talking about how demonic the temple is right before you showed up. So that was a brave move. I wanted to commend you for that.
I have to say, if I wanted to find demons, that's where I would go looking. Not sure I would call the temple itself demonic, but that's where I would go looking.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, everybody has to develop their own participatory rituals, I guess, is the way I look at it. Although I'm not a faithful LDS member either. So, I don't think it was too brave for me to get on. But, thank you, Jacob, for having us. And, we kind of rated your stream here, the little LDS LDS bros as opposed to the Ortho bros. But, yeah, I know you're Orthodox now, Jeremy. But, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Jeremy, any final words?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Adam, my great-grandmother was the first white person born on the Duchesne Indian Reservation. So I also, we came across with the pioneer stock, and, my relatives all heard missionaries in Great Britain and responded to the call to come to America and build Zion. So they all walked here because we were poor. And so my ancestors paid a high price to come here, and I try to honor their memory. I pray for them every day. Because I'm Mormon, I also have a really rich genealogy of my ancestors, so I have a lot of names to pray for. But for me, I had always been looking for, I didn't know that there was such a thing as mystical Christianity. I didn't know there was mysticism in Christianity because of my Mormon upbringing and because of my exposure to, Calvinism. Those were my 2 brands of Mormonism that I had been exposed to. And even when I was a missionary, I remember saying, man, what this Mormon church really needs is a monastery. We really need monks. And my mission president looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, what are you talking about? But I could see the need even then for the monastic life, and for even within lay people, the ascetic struggle, right? The asceticism of temporarily, you were talking about this earlier, Jacob, or last night with Father Stephen about, the temporary periods of fasting followed by a feast, right? And that is a natural part of.
I was actually very impressed to the 1 week a month religious Mormons fast and give that money to the poor.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's something like a lot of Mormons take very seriously,
Yeah.
which is plenty more fasting than almost all other Protestant.
Yeah, it's basically been lost.
Yeah.
You know? So anyway, just being able to find mysticism, which means I learned what it means to really pray, and I'm still learning. I mean, obviously your whole life is spent learning how to pray, right? Your whole life is learning how to focus your attention on God and to let go of everything else that's in your mind. And through Orthodoxy, I've found medicine not only for me, but for my family that has healed us in a way that if you would have told me 5 years ago what my marriage would have looked like today, I wouldn't have believed that it was still existing. My life was falling apart. My marriage was falling apart. My family was falling apart. My daughter was estranged. My professional life wasn't going well. Everything was broken. And through Christ and through Orthodoxy, I've been healed. And I'm more at peace in my spiritual life. It's again the paradox of encountering Christ reveals your weakness, right? But in having your own weakness revealed, you find hope as well. And I find hope like I can see the change in my life, but it's harder to see in my own self than it is to see in the lives of those around me. And I can definitely see a hope in my family that wasn't there 5 years ago. And I can only credit, I pray for Jordan every day. I pray for Jonathan every day. And I pray for my ancestors every day because they all brought me here. And I too want to echo Adam's words, Jacob, and thank you for your openness and thank you for your willingness to just listen to a bunch of Christians talk, because you could be studying right now. You could be in a why can't I think of? I'm sorry.
Beit Midrash?
No, well, yeah, I was going to say your church.
Yeah, synagogue.
Thank you. Well, I think of the word. You could be in synagogue right now. You could be studying. You could be praying. But instead you're listening to Christian people ramble. And it's a beautiful thing because I think this is the healing that needs to happen for that Renaissance to happen. If we're going to save our world, it's going to be through repentance ourselves and through talking to each other, because arguing and yelling and debating and ending up in silos where echo chambers is not how we're going to get through this. Right? There's just no way.
So I lied. I said I was going to give you guys the last word, but I'm actually going to give Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk the last word.
Beautiful.
There's nothing more complete than a broken heart, and there's nothing more upright than a crooked ladder.